Good afternoon and welcome to Climate Tech Talks, Transformer Supply Chains Turning Extended Lead Times into Competitive Advantage, a highly relevant and timely topic for the market. My name is Alexandra Martins, Senior Content Manager for Climate Berlin, and I'm delighted to have you all joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the session and opportunity to connect virtually with our peers. Before we get started, just a few quick housekeeping points. If you have any questions, please add them in the comments. The webinar will be available on demand after the session. The slides will be available for download on our website. I'm pleased to introduce our speakers, Azhar Fayyaz, Senior Analyst, and Naj Nassereddin, Commercial Director EMEA at PTR. I will now hand over to our speakers. Welcome, Naj and Azhar.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining and Kwame for hosting me. Today, as Alexandra mentioned, we are going to present about the transformer supply chains. So our presentation will, first we will give you a brief about PTR and who we are, what we do, and then we'll deep dive with my colleague Azhar, who is the specialist on the transformer topic, and we'll cover the global transformer market landscape, anything regarding the demand overview, the supply overview, and then he will have a deep dive on the power transformer supply landscape, and then key takeaways, some strategic takeaways for you. So starting with about PTR, who are we, and basically who you are getting your insights from today. PTR started about a decade ago as a company for market intelligence for the power sector. So the owners of PTR understood that, okay, our industry, it lacks a lot of information out there, one source of truth, and that's how the company started. And it's even though we expanded to other products other than market intelligence, which I'll deep dive into later, we stayed on our main three laws for the company. And the first one is transparency. We take pride that in any project we do, we always tell everyone the methodology of how we will get to the results of whatever we are doing for them, who's going to work on their projects, and also any samples that are needed, we send them in advance. The second thing is the diligence. And what that means is that, so whenever we provide any, let's say, services for our customers, any projects, we always use our industry experts who are both technical and understand the market so well. So for example, if we have a transformer project, we will have Azhar and his team who know so much about transformers working on the transformer project. And then the last part is the digestibility. And what that means is that we're available for our clients after submitting any project, even before then, even before the sale happens, just because we want to make sure that our clients get the maximum value out of any project that we deliver. Moving forward to what we provide as services. So the first one is market research. It's our bread and butter. We've been doing it for the past decade, and we cover a lot of customized topics because, of course, each customer's demands are different. And also there are some syndicated topics out there, but we're, say, more specialized on the customized part. Then we have the marketing services, and this also kind of became a natural service because after delivering lots of research projects, a lot of our clients would ask us to create content for them or help them publish their articles somewhere through our many, let's say, partnerships in the industry. A lot of media partnerships we have. We're knowledge partners of many of them. And because of that, we decided to make it an offering where we help all our, any client interested in marketing with both content, marketing strategy, PR, and basically to achieve their specific goal, whether it's lead generation or, for example, better positioning in a specific country and all of that. And moving on to the advisory service, this is my favorite one. It's very strategic. It's a layer on top of research. So basically, instead of giving you the market for, let's say, transformers for X amount of countries, if you wish to expand, we can tell you which are the best countries to expand to. Depending on your revenue goals, we can shortlist a few countries and then create a strategy of how to enter these countries. It can also be a product diversification strategy, not just market expansion. It can be even pricing strategies and so on. And then we have the do-it-on-your-own tools, I like to call them, which are Cognito and Matos. So Cognito is PTR's expert network. we decided to create our own expert network at the beginning because we noticed it's not easy getting experts out there from normal expert networks. So we created our own. And any, let's say, good research needs both secondary and primary parts. And so this expert network helps us with the primary part of the research, to have the interviews with the experts, the surveys. And of course, it just naturally became a product because many of our clients would want access to that network to, let's say, get a specific questions done through interviews, through surveys, and not a whole research done. And Matos AI is our data automation tool. It helps us with secondary research. Just imagine, instead of spending hours doing specific research, this automates different parts of the secondary research to also help us gain, let's say, most data points for a specific topic for our customers. Then moving forward to our, let's say, topic coverage. Most of the topics, like, actually we only cover the power sector. So we do like anything related to T&D, like transformers, switchgear, anything related to grid reliability, like synchronous condensers, FACTS, HVDC, anything related to grid automation, substation automation, for example, or protection relays, or anything related to, let's say, new energy or grid edge, for example, EV charging infrastructure, hydrogen, battery energy storage systems, and so on. There are some other topics, of course, that we cover that are not in this presentation, but they have to stay relevant within the power sector. And yeah, and then moving forward for our clients. So you've seen the type of work we have done. And so naturally, we serve, of course, the OEMs. So most of the tier 1 and tier 2 OEMs are our clients. And then we also serve a lot of consulting firms who subcontract our research. And because of, let's say, our EV side as well, EV charging and BESS, we also support a lot of automotive OEMs. And also we support a lot of, let's say, financial institutions, investment banks, and private equities to help them with their investment decisions. These are a sample of our customers. I chose the ones mainly from Europe and Middle East. I think this is the most relevant audience in today's webinar, but generally, of course, we have from all over the world as well. As I mentioned, one of the topics we cover is transformers, and we do lots of deep dives into that topic. And so today's webinar session will be about that. And now I will hand over to our expert, Azhar Fayyaz, to present to you today's insights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naj. Let me introduce you or walk you through the today's agenda of our webinar. So over the past 3 years, transformer industry has moved from being a relatively stable industrial segment to, I would say, one of the most strategically constrained sectors in the global energy infrastructure. What we are seeing nowadays is that large power transformer lead times are quoted into 2030 and beyond. Utilities are scaling their capital expenditure plans by multiples, not by percentages. OEM utilization rates are approaching more than 90%, and supply bottlenecks are shifting from usual commodities like steel and copper to a highly specialized components like tap changers and high voltage bushings. But what makes this movement different from the previous cycles is this is not a temporary spike. This is a structural reset, and the electrification wave that we are experiencing, that is driven by renewables, grid modernization, decarbonization policy, AI-driven data centers, and industrial reshoring. And this is something like this, which is not peaking in 2 to 3 years. It is accelerating towards 2030, and that changes everything. Because in a supply-constrained market, two things happen simultaneously. Some players struggle with delays, penalties, and margin pressure, while others gain pricing power, secure long-term contracts, expand geographically, and fundamentally reshape their competitive positioning. So today's session is basically built around that exact shift. In our discussion today, we will explore how fast the global transformer demand is really growing, where regional supply imbalances are widening, why light power transformers are entering a prolonged shortage phase, how Asia Pacific, particularly China or non-China Asia, that is positioned in this overall cycle, and what this means for the manufacturers, component suppliers, and utilities. You will notice that this discussion is not just about the market size, it's about the capacity, it's about utilization, investment timing, trade flows, and the strategic positioning. Like Ned said, we are going to cover the market sizing all the way to the advisory part and everything. Now, if you talk about the next 5 years, Then the next 5 years in the transformer industry, I believe like those will not reward the biggest players, but they will reward the most strategically prepared ones. So let's begin ourselves by grounding ourselves in the demand fundamentals that are driving this unprecedented pressure. What's important to understand first is that like demand acceleration is not coming from one source; it's multi-layered, it's structural and global. Now, if we talk about the market, so when we combine both power and distribution transformers, the global market is expected to grow from approximately 51 billion US dollars in 2024 to 83 billion US dollars by 2030. And this translates to a CAGR of roughly 8.5%. For a heavy industrial product category like transformers, this is not an incremental growth. This is a structural acceleration, I would say. And most importantly, this growth is not evenly distributed across the region. As you can see on slide, like some markets are expanding significantly above the global average, while others are beginning to normalize. Let's start with North America, having the highest growth rate, right? North America has been one of the strongest growth stories over the last 2 to 3 years, I would say, that is driven by grid resilience mandates, infrastructure funding, and the data center expansion in the country. However, when we look forward, particularly at the United States, renewable energy, surprisingly, like additions of renewable energy in the country, they have slowed down compared to the aggressive build out we saw in the earlier post IRA phase, like in 2022 or 2023. As a result, while broader transformer market in North America remains strong, the renewables driven segment that is expected to experience a negative CAGR in the US for the next few years. So I just wanted to highlight like though North America is growing with the maximum CAGR, but renewable sector in that particular market that is witnessing a negative CAGR. If we compare that with the European market, Europe's growth story is fundamentally anchored in renewable integration, cross-border interconnections, and aggressive 2030 decarbonization targets, I would say. If you talk about the European TSOs, then they have moved beyond incremental upgrades. They are redesigning their grids to accommodate offshore wind, large-scale solar, and HVDC corridors. So Europe is expected to grow above the global average, definitely, particularly in large power transformers and high voltage applications. If we move towards the Asia Pacific market, then APEC remains structurally strong, not only because of the domestic demand in, I would say, major markets like India and Southeast Asian countries, but also because the region serves as a major export base to the rest of the world. We have got, major export hubs like China, Vietnam, etc. If you talk about the India, then transmission build out in the country, renewable corridor development and industrial growth, those are expected to keep the regional growth robust. Overall, APEC will grow at slightly above global averages, but with significant variation between China and other, rest of the APEC countries, I would say. If we talk about the Middle East market, uh, growth is accelerating, particularly in Saudi Arabia, that is driven by localization strategies, grid expansions, and the giga projects. The region is likely to outperform the global average in the second half of this decade. Uh, with, I would say, like, while all these projects continue to support the demand, but ongoing regional crisis that could slow progress in the Middle East. We have to see like how things unfold in the coming days, right? Similarly, if we talk about the South American market, that remains more volatile. Growth is there in the market, but I would say it's more policy sensitive and price driven. So the key takeaway I would say from this slide is yes, the global transformer market is strongly growing at 8.5%, but the opportunity is not uniform. It is regionally asymmetric. And understanding where growth is structural versus where it is cyclical, that will determine where capital and partnerships should be prioritized. Now, now that like we have established the scale of demand growth, like there is growth, right? And so the next critical question becomes what exactly is driving this expansion? What makes this cycle different from previous transformer upcycles is that demand is not coming from one isolated segment. It is being driven by four simultaneous macro forces. Uh, the one question that I have been hearing from most of the OEMs is like they are reluctant to make investment because they're not sure whether this demand is going to be sustainable in the future or not, right? Is this something like temporary? So I told them like these multiple macro forces, those those are something like this industry is witnessing for the very first time. Now, if we connect the macro forces in a logical sequence, we'll see like these trends are not isolated; they reinforce each other. Uh, let's start with decarbonization and electrification trend. So across the major economies, there's a clear policy direction towards net zero targets by 2030 and beyond. Now that includes electrification of transport, electrification of industrial processes, electrification of heating, and a broader energy transition towards a cleaner generation. What happens is that electrification increases load density and increases peak demand. That eventually shifts power consumption patterns. But I would say electrification is alone, like that is not the full story. Parallel to that, we are seeing renewable energy expansion at scale. Solar and wind additions require step up transformers at generation sites, substation expansions, transmission reinforcement, and interconnection upgrades. Thus, it won't be wrong to say like these renewables, these are transformer intensive by nature. Now, here is the key dynamic. Renewables are often built faster than transmission infrastructure can accommodate them. If you look at the timeline of a power plant versus the timeline of a transmission infrastructure, then the power plant is built faster usually, which means generation capacity come online but grid upgrades lag, and that naturally leads to the next structural trend, which is grid expansion. Now, to integrate renewables, manage higher electrification loads, and connect new industrial clusters, countries are expanding transmission corridors, building new substations, and strengthening distribution networks. In many cases, this is the largest transmission build out seen in decades. However, expansion alone is not enough because much of the grid, like I would say, existing grid infrastructure is also aging in regions like in some European countries, like in the Nordic region and the US market, right? Everyone is aware, like in US market, like more than 70-80% of the network is operating beyond its, expected lifespan. Uh, Now, if we talk about the aging and replacement of existing grid infrastructure, then definitely like we will see a lot of demand from the North American market and some European countries as well. On top of that, extreme weather events, they have also exposed weaknesses in the grid resilience. So utilities are not just building, new infrastructure, they are also replacing and hardening existing assets. So if you talk about the US market, I would say after COVID, like in the recent past, they have witnessed significant weather related outages, right? And because of that, now grids and the utilities, they are also investing in, not only replacing the aged assets, but also hardening the existing ones. Blackout in Spanish market, right? After that, Spanish utilities are investing significantly in the grid upgradation, grid modernization, grid hardening, I would say. So this creates an overlapping demand in the market, new capacity as well as the replacement of the existing capacity. Now, add one more layer on top of that. That is like data center growth and AI-driven digitalization. So the scale of power intensity that is required for AI infrastructure, that is fundamentally different from the traditional data nodes, I would say. If we talk about the hyperscale data centers, then those demand like higher capacity transformers, redundant configurations, and the faster deployment timelines. And important thing to note over here is that like most of these hyperscale data center projects, they cannot tolerate delays. Like unlike traditional utility projects where timelines can sometimes shift, data center investments are commercially time sensitive. This is putting additional pressure on transformer procurement cycles, particularly in North America and some European countries where data center growth is like significant or it's huge. And when you combine all of these, like electrification, renewables, expansions, replacements, and AI growth, right? You get the inevitable outcome. That is like supply demand imbalance in the market. I would say manufacturing capacity, it has not expanded at the same pace as demand acceleration. We'll see in a bit like how supply capacity is growing in all these regions for these products, right? In a while. Now, because of this supply demand imbalance, you like major transformer OEM across the globe, they are running at more than 90% utilization rates. Lead times have extended severely. Uh, it has given higher pricing power to the OEMs, I would say, and also definitely it poses a risk, procurement risk for the utilities and APCs, right? So what we are witnessing is not just the market growth. We are witnessing a systematic stress. We are witnessing a systematic stress test for the global, transformer supply chain. So with all these, I would say structural, forces creating sustained pressure, it's time to quantify how this translates into actual demand growth across power and distribution transformers separately. Uh, Now, if we talk about the power transformers, the way we define power transformers at PTR is power transformers operate uh, at a voltage level above 42 kilowatt with a rating of more than 5 MVA for your reference. So, if you talk about the power transformers, then the global power transformer market is expected to grow from approximately 27 billion US dollars in 2024 to nearly 49 billion US dollars by 2030. Now, that reflects a CAGR of roughly 10%. Now, this growth rate, I would say, is significantly above the historical norm for this segment. What's driving this acceleration? First, transmission expansion at scale. Across Europe, TSOs have shifted from maintenance-focused spending to full-grid transformation programs. Offshore wind integrations, cross-border interconnections, and HVDC deployments are fundamentally increasing the need for large power transformers in the region. Excuse me. Second, if we talk about the North American market, then the utilities in the US and Canada, they are operating under structurally higher capital expenditure cycle. Renewable integration definitely is also affected there. Reliability mandates and aging infrastructure replacement, they are all pushing investment trends upward. And in several cases, utilities are scaling capex plans by multiples. Like I was looking at the investment plan of a major, I would say, ISO in the United States, and I found they revised their capex plan by 5 times. So this is not a minor increase; this is huge. Third is the emerging markets. Like if you talk about the Middle East and some parts of Asia, then grid expansion is not only about decarbonization, it is about industrial growth. It is about mega projects and the load growth from new cities and energy intensive developments. Now, here is the important nuance, I would say. The growth is capital intensive and long cycle. Power transformers, especially large units, they require like long engineering, testing, and manufacturing timelines. Like power transformers are complex devices, I would say. So when demand accelerates at 10% CAGR in the coming years, manufacturing capacity is not expanding at that 10% rate. It is expanding at a much slower rate. So this pressure, the pressure due to supply demand imbalance that is building quickly, and this is exactly what we are seeing today. The segment is not just growing, it is entering a structurally tight supply environment. Now, if we talk about the distribution transformers, we know like power transformers, that's just half of the story, right? If you look at the distribution transformer market, what is being driven by a slightly, which is being driven by a slightly different demand profile. Distribution transformer market, on the other hand, that is expected to grow from approximately 24 billion US dollars to 34 billion US dollars by 2030, and that represents a CAGR of almost 6%. So while growth here is slightly lower than power transformers, it remains structurally strong. The key difference is the demand drivers for distribution transformers. Like distribution transformer demands, it comes from the electrification of load at the local network level, residential and commercial load growth, EV charging infrastructure, rooftop solar integration, and the data center cluster development, like the co-location data centers. So we are also seeing a clear increase in the these are different demand drivers for distribution transformers as well. Another trend that we have observed in the recent past is there is a clear increase in the average size of distribution transformers within the utility networks. Now, why is that? Because load density is increasing. Urbanization, electrification of heating, EV adoption, all of these, drivers, they require higher capacity distribution units than in the past. Another important trend is grid resilience. Like I said, since 2017, extreme weather events have pushed utilities to reconsider overhead mounted configuration, especially in the high risk urban zones. So now they are basically undergrounding their existing, I would say, distribution network. They're shifting from pole mounted to the pad mounted distribution transformers. So what we are seeing is the growing preference for underground compatible units, more robust configurations, and the higher efficiency designs with lower losses, I would say. If we talk about the insulation split, then globally oil immersed transformers, they continue to dominate. I would say most of this demand is coming from the utility and the solar applications due to the cost competitiveness and the thermal performance. So uh, if we compare both power and distribution transformers, I would say like while the distribution transformer segment, it does not face the extreme bottleneck similar to the power transformers, demand is still there. it is persistent and tied closely to the electrification trends. That's so. If when we combine both power and distribution transformer segments, they are growing simultaneously, right? And that's when overall system pressure begins to intensify. Uh, Now that like we have established that demand across both power and distribution transformers is structurally strong, right? The critical question now becomes: is global manufacturing capacity keeping pace with that demand? Let's examine the supply side, right? So when we analyze the regional cumulative capacity versus demand between 2024 and 2030, we see an uneven global picture. So basically, summed up the total demand for the 6 years and supply, and then look for the supply demand gap. So if you talk about the North American market, then that remains deficit for both large power transformers as well as small to medium power transformers. So for reference, large power transformers correspond to more than 100 MVA capacity units, while small to medium power transformers range somewhere from 10 to 100 MVA ratings, I would say. So if we talk about North American market, then it remains deficit in both segments. If we talk about the European market, then it shows surplus capacity in large power transformers, but I would say tighter conditions in small to medium power transformer segment. Similarly, if we talk about the APAC market, then it stands out. The region has structural surplus capacity in both large and small to medium power transformers, and I would say this is not primarily driven by China, but by non-China countries as well. If we talk about China alone, then it is projected to have an estimated excess supply capacity of more than 5 million MVAs between 2024 and 2030. Now, this is a critical point. If restrictions ease and vendor approval barriers reduce from the utility, then China could rapidly fill a significant portion of the global supply gap. It is very important to understand China can address all the supply demand gap if barriers reduce, like approval barriers and trade restrictions ease. But we know like this is not the case, right? uh, because if that happens, then the market dynamics change dramatically. Because in today's supply constrained market, like high margin environment for the OEMs, which is there nowadays, right? That could quickly shift towards oversupply and pricing pressure if China is allowed to, dump all its production of power transformers to the other market. So, uh, like there would be change if it happens, but we are already seeing some early signals. US does not import, like I would say, that much power transformer from China, but overall, like US imports from China almost doubled in 2024 compared to 2023. And this growth is occurring despite additional tariffs on China under the new administration. So if there is, this suggests that when supply demand, when local supply is constrained, buyers are willing to absorb trade friction. Uh, but China is not the only, like I said earlier before, APEC player that is positioning aggressively. South Korea is also emerging as a strategic exporter to the North America and US in particular. In 2024, South Korea accounted for approximately 20% of small to medium power transformers imports to the US market and about 10% of the large power transformer imports. Now, these shares are expected to increase further because major Korean players like LS Electric, Hyundai Electric, and Hyosung Heavy Industries, they have announced to expand their production capacity to target North American market. They have announced like we are expanding our production capacity. We are already running at full utilization rates, and we are targeting the North American market. Uh, we are also seeing, diversification beyond traditional supplies in the US market. For example, if we talk about the battery energy storage system developers in the US, then they have recently started sourcing power transformer from Japanese players, from Indian and Pakistani suppliers, even I would say. Uh, while this trend begin in storage segment, I would say it is likely to spill over into transmission, industrial, and generation markets, especially if the procurement timelines remain tight. Now let's shift briefly to the Middle East Africa market. In the Middle East Africa region, I would say the region remains, heavily dependent for import of large power transformers. Uh, Indian and Korean suppliers, they already have a strong presence there in the market. At the same time, Chinese companies are increasingly penetrate the market. I would say, particularly in the price sensitive tenders. They are even setting up some facilities there. If we talk about the South America market, the situation is very interesting there. A notable portion of the light power transformers that are manufactured in South America, those are imported to meet the demand of European and North American consumers. Because what OEMs are doing is like they are manufacturing large power transformers in low cost region like that is South America and exporting to high profit margin regions. Like they are benefiting from the high margins in Europe and North America. However, to meet the local requirements, the market remains highly dependent on imports from Asian manufacturers. They are exporting their own product to high profit margin market and importing from Asian suppliers at low cost. So that's how it's working in South American markets. So what does this mean strategically? It means that global supply tightness is real but is regionally uneven. APEC has the latent capacity to rebalance the overall global supply demand gap, but the key uncertainty or the key question is not whether capacity exists. It does exist in the APEC region. The key question is whether geopolitical trade and vendor qualification barriers will allow the capacity to flow freely from one region to the other, right? And that will determine whether there remains a high margin supply constrained market in power transformers, or it transitions into a far more competitive global landscape. Now, if we talk about the distribution transformer supply landscape, it is very different from power transformers, I would say. Unlike power transformers, distribution transformers face fewer global supply constraints, largely because like their designs are standardized and manufacturing is relatively simple. So distribution transformer supply is much more fragmented compared to power transformers. Uh, like the if you talk about the market, then it is much localized with production serving regional demand. However, North American market is an exception. Uh, why? After 2008 crisis, like no significant new manufacturing investments were made in the United States, uh, whereas demand, that kept on increasing. So after COVID-19, when suddenly demand surged in the US market, the region faced, significant shortage of distribution transformers, and now they're importing almost 20 to 25% of distribution transformers from the other markets. One of the key factors that are driving competitiveness in distribution transformer is a mix of suppliers. Uh, End users like utilities, they usually prefer local production in case of distribution transformers. Like local production provides several advantages: low price per kVA, faster delivery, and the better services. And this is very much visible in I would say Middle East, APEC, and Eastern European markets, where regional manufacturers are they are outperforming even global OEMs. They have captured maximum market shares, whereas the OEMs, they are not performing that much in those markets because they rely heavily on imports. At the same time, Chinese and Turkish players, they are also gaining traction in the price sensitive segments. They are often winning contracts through highly competitive pricing. In one case, I found out like Chinese players were bidding up to 30% lower prices for the tenders in order to win the project. So the 20 to 30% uh, the price difference is huge, and that is what's helping them in winning the tenders. If we talk about the lead times, lead times are another area where regional differences matter. If we talk about the Asia Pacific region, large scale local manufacturing and strong inventory levels, they allow for very short delivery time, typically around 12 weeks. Like it's very easy for OEMs to maintain inventory level for distribution transformers, right? Uh, in contrast, North American and especially the US, it has the longest lead time in the world, averaging around 34 weeks. And though those are stabilizing now with new investments or new manufacturing plants coming online, but still like those are huge. If we talk about the pricing trends, I would like to highlight a very important trend over here. Globally, definitely like transformer prices have increased post COVID due to the higher commodity costs and supply chain challenges. But North America is an exception again over here. It stands out with cost per kVA nearly 5 times the global average. So whatever the price per kVA is of distribution transformer in other regions, North American OEMs are charging 5 times of that, and that is definitely driven by higher labor and material costs, strong replacement demand, and strict efficiency standards in both the US and Canadian market. finally we see the investment trends are shifting. North America, despite its earlier shortages, now leads globally in distribution transformer investment because that's where I would say most of the supply demand gap is coming. In North American market, a lot of OEMs are investing in distribution transformer manufacturing. It has recorded the highest number of new facilities and capacity expansion, reflecting a renewed focus on addressing supply gaps and modernizing the regional networks. So, in summary, while global supply of distribution transformer is generally stable, I would say regional dynamics, especially in North America, they also play a critical role over there in terms of pricing, lead times, and the competitiveness. Understanding these nuances is key for planning, procurement, and market strategy. So whoever has the idea about these market dynamics, they would be able to benefit from the existing market dynamic scenarios. Now, uh, having said like distribution transformer market stable, we understand like power transformer market is something like we need to zoom in further because uh, in case of light power transformer, the pressure is most acute. If we uh, deep dive into power transformer supply landscape, then first let's talk about the light power transformers. Uh, PTCR PTR anticipates that there is a continued need for new production facilities, particularly in North America and Middle East. Like we looked at the supply demand gap, right, in the previous slides for all the regions, and there was huge supply demand gap in case of North America and Middle East. Though new manufacturing investments are happening in these regions, but we still believe like North America and Middle East is, those are the regions where there is potential for further future investments. Now, if we talk about the global, utilization rate, then the global utilization rate for light power transformer is around 70%, and that is projected to reach 80% by 2030 within that was the global utilization rate. If we talk about the regional differences, then there like within the region uh, differences exist, I would say. So leading APEC manufacturers in Korea like LS Electric, Hyundai Electric that we just discussed, and China and Japan, they are already operating over 80% utilization rate. So some of these major OEMs, they are operating at a utilization rate of more than 90%, while the global utilization rate is at 70%, right? While if we talk about smaller players in India and China, so they are running at 50 to 70%, and that reflects disparity in available capacity and operational efficiency. If we talk about the lead times, then they also vary widely. For example, in Europe and North America, delivery timelines for the light power transformers can extend up to 5 years, and that creates long planning horizons for utilities and EPCs. APEC, by contrast, I would say it maintains an average lead time of about 1 year. However, those APEC suppliers which are fulfilling orders for North American market, those are also facing delays, I would say, and they are uh, quoting timelines of 2028 and beyond for light power transformers, which they are exporting to the North American market. To address this growing demand, major investments, definitely, like I said earlier, in light power transformer manufacturing are underway globally. Hitachi Energy is leading the expansion efforts worldwide, while in America's WEG is scaling up to meet the North American demand. It is setting up facilities in Mexico, Brazil, Colombia. Additionally, South Korean manufacturers, they are also increasingly targeting the US market. Like they are expanding their manufacturing facilities in Korea, as well as they are expanding and setting up new facilities in the US market as well. Now, in short, the light power transformer market is tightening with rising utilization rates, extended lead times, and active investment. It signals that supply will need to keep pace with strong and growing global demand, and OEMs have realized that. Now, if we talk about the small to medium power transformers, then global demand is expected to grow at nearly 6% CAGR between 2024 and 2030. However, production capacity is projected to expand uh, more slowly, I would say, with just 2% CAGR during the same period. Why is that so? Why are not OEMs already investing in small to medium power transformers? The answer to that lies in significant installed capacity. So the current utilization rate of small to medium power transformer OEMs is somewhere around 55%. and basically this limits the potential for the major new investments. If we talk about the lead time for small to medium power transformers, then they currently remain under 1 year. That offers reasonable flexibility for buyers. However, I would say, like, if we talk about the European market and the North American market, then the lead times in these two regions could stretch in the coming years, because uh, North American market is already import driven. Europe is at present is, somehow balancing its manufacturing with the local demand. But in the coming years, demand for small to medium power transformer in Europe due to renewable sector will outpace the supply, and Europe has to start importing small to medium power transformers. Overall, global utilization rates for small to medium power transformers are projected to climb to around, I would say, 65% by 2030, reflecting the gradual tightening of supply. Investment activity. If you look at the investment activity of small to medium power transformers, then it is mostly concentrated in APAC region, where production is primarily export driven to markets like Latin America, Middle East, and Africa. Europe, that follows the second largest, I would say, regional investment in case of small to medium power transformer manufacturing. Uh, like these are the only two regions where there is some movement in small to medium power transformer manufacturing. So in short, while like I said, small to medium power transformer demand is growing steadily, careful planning and a measured approach is required for the new entrants. Like they need to understand where to invest in, which region needs investment for small to medium power transformer manufacturing, and how much, right? So that was about the uh, large and small medium power transformers at a global level. If we deep dive into the regional, I would say, transformer power transformer market trends, then starting with North America, the large power transformer market in North America, like it is one of the largest markets, and that is heavily dependent on imports. Like more than 80% of the large power transformers in US are imported from other countries. Now, to address this, significant investments are underway to expand domestic production. Current projections suggest that large power transformer capacity in the region could nearly double by 2030, and around 65% of this, growth has already been announced. If you talk about the U.S. manufacturing facilities capacity utilization, then they have a utilization rate of about 90% for the large power transformer and 95% for small to medium power transformers. Now, these levels are expected to remain high due to constraints such as delays in raw material supply, particularly, I would say, tap changes from a certain supplier and bushings. Uh, because 30% of these raw materials, they are imported from Europe to the US market. And definitely, shortage of skilled manpower is another major challenge in the US market, I would say. If we talk about the lead times, then the lead times in North America, they are among the longest globally. The small to medium transformers taking 1.5 to 2 years, and large power transformers requiring 6 to 7 years. Suppliers like Hitachi Energy, Virginia Transformers, they are already quoting deliveries into 2031. Um, However, like by 2030, I believe these lead times are expected to shorten as new production capacities come online and production cycle stabilizes. If we talk about the European market, then we anticipate like additional 70,000 MVAs of power transformer capacity will come online by 2030, and more than half of that is already, announced in terms of investments. In terms of utilization rate, European facilities range somewhere between 80 to 90 for small to medium, and 75 to 85 for the large power transformers. Definitely, these utilization rates, they are hampered by challenges like quality control issues, testing failures, raw material shortages, and supply chain disruptions, which definitely result in production falling below the total capacity, and they are not able to realize their full potential. If you talk about the APEC market, then China holds definitely a significant capacity in the APEC, but as I said earlier, non-China APEC is also well equipped to meet the global demand, particularly to the North America and Middle East, because these are the two regions where there is shortage of power transformers, right? So even if Chinese players are not allowed to export to these two regions, rest of the APEC region can meet the supply-demand gap in these two regions. Utilization rates in the APEC region is around 60 to 70 for the large power transformer and 50 to 60 for small to medium power transformers. Finally, if you talk about the Middle East Africa market, then the total transformer capacity is projected to grow by roughly 30,000 MVAs by 2030. And more than 70% of this is already backed by investment commitment. Large power transformers, if you talk, as I said earlier, like the region imports mostly large power transformers from Europe, from APEC. So large power transformers account for 90% of the imports, uh, while local players are there in the region that supply small to medium power transformers. Current, I would say, utilization rate in the region is about 70%, and definitely that is expected to reach 80% by 2030, due to push for localization and the addition of new capacity. So if we summarize, then each region is navigating its own supply and demand dynamics. North America is focused on reducing, import reliance and addressing long lead time. Europe continues to export while meeting growing domestic needs. APEC balances regional and global demand, and Middle East Africa is expanding capacity with an eye on import, with an eye on localization and import substitution. Excuse me. Now, we have discussed the demand side, we have discussed the supply side, right? Now let's look at the regional capacity addition, like where investments are being made and what that means for global supply dynamics. How OEMs are responding to these supply demand imbalances in different regions. So first, if we talk about the North American market, right? Then the US and Mexico, they are seeing significant investments in large power transformers. For example, like I said, WEG is building power transformer facilities in Mexico, right? Hitachi Energy is upgrading its facility in Canada. Hyosung and Hyundai, they're expanding their US plants to increase ultra high voltage transformers output. G is also building a new facility to double its medium power transformer production. Siemens Energy is also expanding. So, all these players are expanding in North America, and like North America is the region I would say that is witnessing the maximum number of investments by these transformer OEMs. Now, next is the Europe. So Europe has a mix of, I would say, expansions targeting both large and small medium power transformers. So notable, like most of these investments are happening uh, by Hitachi Energy in the region, I would say. For example, if you talk about Hitachi Energy, then it is investing in Sweden, it is investing in Finland, right? It is investing in Turkey. Uh, so if you talk about Siemens Energy, it is also increasing its capacity by 50% in Germany. Conchar and Siemens, they also announced, a new transformer production plant. They are expanding it in Croatia. R&S is planning to double its capacity in Poland. Grant Selected, they're also building a new facility in Hungary. So you see, uh, there's a mix, there's a mix in terms of investment by these OEMs, for both, large and small to medium power transformers. Finally, if we talk about the APEC region, then APEC definitely continues to dominate globally. Hyosung, Hyundai, LS Electric, they are expanding South Korean capacities for both large and small medium power transformers. Toshiba is also planning to double its production capacity both in Japan and India by 2030. Voltam transformers, CG Power, Schneider, even Siemens Energy expanded its transformer production in India. So we see like a lot of investment is happening in this overall power transformer domain or industry. If we talk about Middle East Africa market, then I would say most of these investments, those are concentrated in Saudi Arabian market. So it's very is expanding. They're starting with small to medium power transformers and planning large power transformers in the future. So if I uh, like discuss the Saudi Arabian market, then uh, SPTC is the only manufacturer of power transformers in Saudi Arabian market, and it can manufacture up to 132 kV. But now it is investing to upgrade its manufacturing capabilities and start manufacturing of 380 kV transformers as well. Uh, Earlier, before it, Saudi Arabia only used to import those 380 kV power transformers, but now SPTC is investing. Volta Oman is first setting up, 132 kV plant in the first phase, and the second phase it also plans to start manufacturing 380 kV. Al is also following the same. So we see like a lot of investment is happening in Middle East Africa as well because of all these localization requirements. Now, what all these what are the strategic applications implications across region, right? If we talk about the North America, domestic expansion is underway, but you know, I don't think like this all these investments or expansions they would ease the large power transformer constraint in the next 2 to 3 years. Like definitely OEMs have announced investment, but it would take time for new plants to come online. It would take time for you know new production lines and expanded facilities to start delivering. So imports, particularly from the APEC, will remain critical in at least next 2 to 3 years in the North American market. Similarly, if we talk about the Europe, capacity growth is there, right, in Europe, and that reinforces Europe role as a net exporter of large power transformers. However, if we talk about small to medium power transformers, then those investments are happening to support the renewable integration, but I would say there's still room for investment in that particular product. If you talk about the Asia Pacific region, then there is latent capacity that can quickly rebalance the global markets and can make the APEC go-to source for the urgent demand fulfillment in case of projects like data centers. If we talk about the Middle East Africa market, investments are targeted, incremental, and strategic. Like strategic in terms of like they are targeting those products which the countries are mostly importing from European markets, and also to meet the local content requirements. So in summary, like timing and regional focus matter. Large power transformer shortages persist in North America and Middle East Africa until new plants are operational. So until those plants are operational, APEC players can, I would say, leverage their spare excess manufacturing capacity. Now, with a clear understanding of where supply sits and who is expanding, so the next logical question then becomes is how should component suppliers and the utilities respond strategically? So for the transformer OEMs, I would say like several strategic actions emerge from the current market dynamics. First, expanding existing large power transformer capacity in Europe is critical. Like European manufacturers are well positioned to serve high demand markets in the Middle East. They are already, serving demand from the North America. So leveraging their existing production expertise and export capabilities, it would make sense for OEMs to expand in the European market. Second, in North American market, acting quickly is essential. So rising domestic demand for small to medium power transformer that creates an opportunity for early movers to capture market share because of most of the investment in North America that is happening in large power transformer segment. And small to medium power transformer segment is, I believe, is where one can invest, to gain early mover advantage. Third is OEM should try to optimize costs with supply chain diversification in order to stay competitive in markets. So we see like Chinese players are expanding their footprint in other regions. Korean suppliers are they have started supplying transformers to different regions. So European or the North American OEM that used to only compete on the basis of quality, they had to strategically balance the local production with the global sourcing to maintain, cost efficiency. They have to diversify their supply chain in order to compete with those low cost quality products from, Asian players. And finally, one can enter the Saudi Arabian market via joint venture because that offers multiple benefits. All these investments from Al World and Oman, those are happening in joint venture because these include multi-year local content waivers, which ease initial investment requirements and secure access to a growing regional market like that is actively investing in localization and new capacity. If we talk about the component and the raw material suppliers, then I would recommend them to partner with the APEC OEM, which are entering international markets. That can be highly beneficial for them because, in certain cases like European utilities or the North American utilities, they usually ask transformer OEMs to provide a certain brands or technologies, and such as tap changers and high voltage bushings, right? And these partnerships will allow these loose component suppliers to align with the fast growing production volumes and secure long-term demand from transformer OEM. Second is expand into Europe and US. So we see a lot of investment is happening by transformer OEMs in the European market, in the US market. So this presents a significant opportunity. Many OEMs are already expanding, so suppliers should move early to capture a share of growing demand. For example, if we talk about the Trench Group, so Triton Partners basically acquired Trench Group from Siemens Energy, and after that acquisition, Trench is investing in a major new bushing facility in the US market. Similarly, Yash High Voltage Bushing is also establishing a high voltage facility in India to serve European market. If you talk about the MR, right? Uh, Considering all that increased demand for the MR tap changers, MR has expanded its facility across Germany, Italy, and the US in order to meet the increasing demand for tap changers. And all this highlights the growing importance of localized component production to reduce lead time and support OEM growth. So, in short, component and raw material suppliers need to align with the OEM expansion plans and focus on preferred technologies and strategically enter the key region markets. Finally, for utilities, I would say the current transformer market presents both challenges and opportunities, and proactive approach is the key. First, we should plan ahead because that is critical. With longer lead times of transformers, particularly for live power transformers, placing orders well in advance is essential to avoid project delays and ensure timely delivery of critical assets. Secondly, going digital can drive efficiency and reliability. So they should adopt online asset health monitoring because that would allow utilities to predict potential failures, reduce unplanned downtimes, and lower repair and maintenance costs for their transformers. And finally, they should be open to new suppliers. They should be open to not only alternative transformer OEMs, but also consider a broader range of components and raw material suppliers. They should, open themselves to, having loose components or tap changes or bushing from some, local players in their transformers rather than having them from some branded players, I would say. So, uh, yeah, that was it from my end. If you guys have any questions, any feedback or comments to share.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
thank you very much for the insightful presentation. Extremely valuable and highly relevant to the current industry landscape. We'll now move into the live Q&A, and I'd like to encourage everyone in the audience to submit any questions in the comments. To begin, I have a couple of questions from my side. The first one is, do you expect similar growth of transformers market from data center segment in Europe, just like US?
So to be honest, uh, there's so much hype about data centers in nowadays. Like everywhere, everyone is talking about the data center market. I have looked at the installed gigawatts because like data center market is usually quantified in terms of megawatts or gigawatts, you can say. So I have looked at the install base of data center capacity in North America and Europe and the projects in the pipeline for both regions. I don't think Europe is going to witness uh, more or less this the tremendous growth that US is experiencing. In case of European market, I would say data center market would constitute roughly 4 to 5% of the total market demand, whereas in case of US market, data center market is roughly quarter of the total market demand. So no, these data center is not, to answer your question, data center will not witness the similar growth in the European market like it experienced in the US market.
Thank you. And conscious of the time, I believe I will do just the last one. That is, where is US importing distribution transformers from?
So US is like more than 50 to 60% of distribution transformers US is importing from Canada and Mexico, like within North America. Uh, Roughly 10% distribution transformers are being imported from the Latin America, uh, hardly 2 to 3% from the European market, and rest from the APAC market. So it's very diverse, but mostly uh, it is importing from the North American market because those suppliers, those like 70% of the demand is met locally from the Americas players, right? And those are well positioned to meet the local IEEE or NC compliant, transformers. So that's what happened in the US market.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. Well, I would like, conscious that we are reaching the hour of the webinar, so I'd like to thank you, Azhar and Naj, for an excellent presentation. I'm sure our audience has gained invaluable insights from today's discussion. A big thank you as well to everyone working behind the scenes. Your efforts made this webinar possible. And as mentioned, today's session will be available on demand on our website. I would like as well to invite you to celebrate innovation, talent, and industry excellence by applying to the Climate Berlin Awards 2026 by the 13th of April. And don't forget to register by the 31st of March for a chance to win a VIP upgrade, including a 2-night hotel stay and exclusive networking opportunities. I very much look forward to welcome you in person at Climate Berlin, taking place from the 19th to the 21st of May. Thank you.
Thank you.
So